We got into more racy and bombshell text messages, hotel nights, even a video that all further examines the relationship between alleged victim Jane and criminal defendant Sean Diddy Combs. Law and Crime's in-court reporter Elizabeth Milner is back with us about what happened in court today as Jane was once again questioned by Diddy's defense attorney. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber.
Diddy sat alone in his cell, the echoes of the courtroom still haunting him like a relentless soundtrack he couldn't turn off. For years, he had been the man no one could touch, the mogul who turned ambition into empire, the name that meant power, money, and dominance. But now, all of that was gone. The music had stopped, the fans had moved on, and the empire he built from nothing was reduced to dust.
These sexual episodes with other men, sex workers, in front of Diddy for his pleasure. But then on cross-examination, they seem to be trying to suggest this was consensual, that she was a willing participant, that he isn't this nefarious sex trafficker as portrayed by the prosecution, that there was no force, fraud, or coercion. So I want to bring on Law and Crime's in-court reporter Elizabeth Milner, who's been not only in the courtroom today for all of the action, but in the courtroom for every minute of the action, every day. And particularly today with the cross-examination of Jane, it's really interesting. Elizabeth, before we even get into that, there was a lot of chatter, particularly on the lunchtime show that we do on Law and Crime's YouTube, and commentary about this juror. There's apparently some sort of issue with a juror. I know we have limited information, but based on what was said in court, can you elaborate on this?
Yeah, so they gave us little tidbits, little pieces of information, little nuggets here and there, but it seems like from the defense's perspective that they really want to keep this particular juror and they want to make sure that this juror will not be dismissed. Now, as far as why this juror might possibly be dismissed, that is still kind of up in the air. As far as what we've even seen in the transcripts, that portion is redacted or it's sealed. And so the defense was just pretty much saying that they want to be able to respond to what the government responded to in another letter. And so they said pretty much that they being the government, and this is the defense making this argument, that the government just wants to strike another black juror. And then I think the government kind of took a little bit of offense to that. And the government was like, well, okay, looking back at the record, we see kind of a lack of compelling, and then they were kind of going so fast. But as far as just what the judge said, as far as what will happen kind of next, is that we'll deal with this issue before the weekend. And so it's still kind of up in the air as far as even all the jurors being inside the courtroom today, because it was a little bit of a shorter session today. Everyone was in there. I saw all the jurors. So nobody has been dismissed thus far. Nobody's been kicked out just yet or anything like that. But we should know before the week is over what will happen to this juror number 6.
Yeah, I saw reporting that the prosecution says there's a lack of candor, meaning, I don't know, the juror wasn't being honest with something during jury selection. I'm not sure. Hopefully you get more information as the week progresses. But let's now get into Jane's testimony. So it seems to me, and there's a lot to get into here, it seems to me a big theme today was trying to stress that she wasn't objecting to the hotel nights, or that she was somehow setting them up or encouraging them, and also how she communicated with the men, how she communicated.
The walls that now surrounded him were not lined with platinum records or luxury art pieces. They were cold, concrete reminders that no amount of fame could shield him from consequence. It's been weeks since the sentencing, the moment that shattered his world and left him a shell of the man who once ruled the industry. Witnesses described him as calm at first, even defiant, but the calm didn't last. As the judge's words echoed through the courtroom, something inside Diddy broke. He tried to hide it, he always did, but the tears came anyway. Not the tears of sorrow or apology, but the tears of a man who finally realized that the system he once controlled had turned its back on him. He had run out of power, out of favors, out of influence.
And unfortunately, we cannot see the exhibits. They are not shown on the exhibit screen, but we're hearing about all these different exhibits. So sometimes when I say we're seeing, the jury's actually seeing it, but we are hearing about all these different text messages. And so, yes, it seemed like the theme from the defense's cross-examination of Jane today was definitely like, it seemed from their kind of theory of this that Jane was a willing participant, even went as far as to set up these hotel nights, and even went as far as to book these entertainers that she specifically wanted for these various hotel nights. And so just right off the bat, we're seeing text exhibits between Jane and Cabral, one of the entertainers or escorts that they use, from December 20th of 2021. So still kind of early-ish into the relationship between Sean Combs and Jane. And so These text messages were after a hotel night where Cabral is saying, "Good morning, love. How are you feeling? We had a pretty intense night. That was the roughest sex we ever had." And then Jane is responding, "Ha ha 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 ha," bunch of emojis. That was one for the books. And then Jane also responded, "Send me something." And then the defense was kind of getting into the length of these hotel nights, where one of the longest hotel nights that she had done was 3 days, which is a long period of time. And then under direct, when AUSA Maureen Comey was doing her direct examination of Jane, Jane was explaining that New Year's Eve of 2022, that Diddy came to Jane's hotel and that 3 men were there that night, and that she seemed okay with doing these types of nights. But as far as Jane's kind of role in setting up these hotel nights, the jury did see other text exhibits between Jane and Cabral, where Cabral is saying, "Hey, I'll be in LA on the 12th of February. And Jane is saying, "Hey, babe, happy Friday. Are you up? How are you? It's my birthday weekend and you didn't show me love. I haven't forgotten that your LA dates are coming up. Make me a personal video just for me." And then Cabral responds to these text messages. And so then the jury also saw more text exhibits, kind of going fast forward a little bit in time, April 4th of 2022, between Jane and Sean Combs, where Diddy is saying, "I've been having crazy fantasies about you and Leo being the Italian person that Jane references. He's actually one of the entertainers, but she calls him the Italian." And then Jane is saying, "I'll figure out what time I can make it out there. Baby, I want to make love to you. I haven't had you to myself. It's been 5 months. I'm fine with the other stuff." And Diddy is saying that he's aroused. "What have you been thinking about? See if the Italian is free after we spend time together. Tomorrow is bad. How about this weekend?" And it seemed like Jane, even for the next hotel night, which occurred 10 days later after these text messages that I just read, but the defense was kind of pointing out that after these specific hotel nights in April of 2022, that Jane and Diddy didn't have hotel nights for about 2 months, whereas under direct, it seemed like Jane was testifying that pretty much every time she saw Diddy, that she was doing these hotel nights. But the defense was really kind of saying, well, there were long periods of times where you weren't doing these hotel nights. It could either be weeks on end, it could be months on end, or there were just times where you and Diddy were just hanging out together and being together and in each other's arms, but you guys weren't always doing these hotel nights. And so then more text exhibits were shown to the jury, this being in June 19th of 2022, where Jane is saying, "I'm having a vibe." Diddy says, "Well, what are you in the mood for?" And Jane is saying, "A good time." And then Diddy saying, "You planned something for me." Jane said, "I know what you want, but I'm not in the mood. I don't want to make you mad." And then Diddy responds, "All good. Surprise me with a freak off role play." And so I think the defense also pointing out here that they didn't do a hotel night, even though it was kind of insinuated in these particular messages. But what they ended up doing was...
Now, in the dark silence of a prison cell, that realization finally hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a headline anymore. It wasn't a trending topic. It wasn't a scandal to spin or a rumor to bury. It was real. His life, his freedom, his name, all stripped away in the blink of an eye. The guards see it now, the shift in him. The arrogance that once filled the air around him has faded. In its place is a heavy stillness, the weight of regret, fear, and something that looks dangerously close to shame. For the first time in decades, Diddy doesn't have control. He can't buy his way out. He can't call his lawyers. He can't summon his entourage. All he has is the sound of his own breathing and the cold steel bars that separate him from everything he ever loved. At night, he sits on the edge of his cot, staring at the floor, the memories flooding back, sold-out tours, champagne celebrations, late-night studio sessions. Every flash of success now feels like a cruel reminder of how far he's fallen. Sources close to the case say that even Diddy's toughest allies have gone silent.
Coercion used to pressure or induce her into engaging in these sex acts, these commercial sex acts in all different kinds of locations. So let me give you a piece of the transcript. She was asked, "During hotel nights, usually what, if any, protection would you and the entertainer use during the intercourse?" She answers, "None." "Why none?" "Because that was my partner's preference." "And who was your partner?" "Sean." "Did you ever ask Sean if the entertainers could wear condoms?" "Yes." "Once or more than once?" "More than once." "What's the first one that you can recall?" "The first night with Don." "And what's the second time you can recall?" "One time at a Miami hotel." "And those 2 times, how did Sean respond?" "He responded dismissive and kind of just almost, I don't know, just in a sense like guilt tripped me out of it and that it wasn't something that he wanted to see." What was Sean's tone when he had these two conversations with you in the room? A bit condescending, like just wanted me to move on from the subject, like as if it just wasn't going to happen, so like stop asking. Now it did come out in cross-examination that he maybe did give an entertainer a condom. But Joe, how important is the protection, the condom aspect to force, fraud, coercion? Because I had a guest on yesterday who said, hey look, she's got to take responsibility. She could have refused to participate if a performer wasn't using condoms, but is it that simple?
It's not that simple because it's going to depend on how the jury takes it, and they could take it two different ways. There are discussions where she's asking about using condoms. Clearly, that's something that she expressed a preference to wanting to do. Okay, is that enough for the jury? The fact that he did not seem to approve of them. Okay, or do we go the other way when we don't see her issuing an ultimatum saying, I can't do this if we're not using condoms, or having him even emphatically say no. He seems to express a preference, but does he emphatically say no? Does he threaten her if they don't use the condoms? Is there something else that makes it more final where she can see in both actuality and perception that she either does not use the condoms or else? So if someone is inclined one way or the other, I think you have evidence that you can take from their conversations to go either way. And that's what makes this difficult.
Joe, she described in graphic detail how these sessions would end with the men, right? How they would finish up, and let's just say how Combs, according to her, didn't want her to clean up, and then they would have sex. She and Combs would have sex after. And she even testified it was these moments with Combs that were the ones that she really enjoyed. She just wanted to be with him. That level of detail, that helps her credibility, right? And it doesn't appear that the defense is saying so much that this stuff didn't happen.
Yeah, I think it does help her credibility because it makes her more vulnerable and more honest. This is not something that somebody wants to sit on the stand and talk about. She clearly loved this man. She clearly wanted to be with him, and that comes through. And so the humanization.
His team has scattered. His businesses are under investigation. And the empire he once ruled is now a sinking ship with no captain. The endorsements are gone. The record deals are gone. Even his closest collaborators have distanced themselves. The industry that once bowed at his feet now whispers about him like a ghost story, a warning of what happens when the empire becomes too dark to sustain. Inside prison, Diddy has tried to adapt, but the adjustment has been brutal. Gone are the luxury dinners, the custom suits, the flashing cameras. In their place are bland meals, strict schedules, and the constant reminder that he's no longer the man in charge. Inmates whisper his name, guards glance at him, and for the first time, he's just another number in the system. The mogul who once owned the room now has to ask permission to leave it. Those close to him say the breakdown came quietly. No explosion, no outburst, just silence. A deep, crushing silence.
Historically been excluded. That night reminded me that we belong in every room, at every table, and in every conversation. He's constantly encouraged me and so many others to dream bigger, walk in confidence, and never shrink who we are to make others comfortable. I've also witnessed him doing real inner work. He made the choice to check himself into anger management, start therapy, and commit to physical healing through therapy. That takes strength, humility, and self-awareness. He didn't do it for show. He did it because he wanted to grow and to become a better person. In my personal experience, Sean is not a danger or threat to the community. He is a man of God, someone who uplifts, supports, and inspires those around him to be better mentally, physically, and spiritually. But more than anything, he's a father, and his kids are the ones who look up to him the most. They need him. His presence, love, and guidance matter deeply in their lives. I truly believe that he belongs at home with his family, the people who mean the most to him, and who continue to be his greatest source of purpose and strength. Judge, that's a good man. Music producer Dallas Austin wrote in part, "As I have become to know Sean over the years, he has become like a brother to me. I have always seen him as a man of unwavering dedication to his loved ones, his family, especially his mom and children. He is a devoted father whose family always comes first, and the balance he maintains between his personal and professional life is both inspiring and admirable." Former Love and Hip Hop star and music producer Stephen Jordan, aka Stevie J, wrote in part, "Being in this entertainment business for 30 years and being friends with Sean, we've both endured personal challenges with anger and drugs, as I've been going to therapy and taking all the necessary precautions never to look back at addiction again. I'm proud of Sean. I've read in the press that he's clean and sober and also taking anger management therapy to become a better person, because we all fall short as long as we correct ourselves and never revert to our old ways." Now that's just scratching the surface. The defense submitted more than 65 letters of support in favor of Combs to the judge. There are also letters from each of his children, with the exception of his daughter, who's a toddler. However, his youngest daughter's mother, Dana Tran, wrote a letter of support. So did his mom, his sister, the mother of his daughter, Chance, too. So will the judge side with the very man whose motto was once "bad boy for life" come sentencing? Well, his defense team sent the judge nearly 200 pages of reasons why he shouldn't be kept behind bars. Some of the reasons include the jury, which, if you remember, some jurors made headlines themselves over the course of the trial and even after. For example, juror number 6, who was dismissed from the case after prosecutors were concerned he made inconsistent statements during the jury selection process about where he lived. Then another juror experienced health issues, putting a halt on the trial for a day after he experienced vertigo on the way to court. Then there was the alternate juror, who didn't deliberate but still told CNN he would have came to the same conclusion. Even though the juror, who only went publicly by the name George, didn't go into the deliberation room, he still sat through every single day of trial, even being one of the few people in the entire world to see the freak-off tapes. But he told CNN's Laura Coates the sex tapes weren't as graphic as expected, saying it was pretty tame. It was a lot of rubbing oil and stuff. It wasn't anything too graphic. The jury was obviously pretty important in the verdict outcome in this case, notably that the jurors who did deliberate didn't convict him of RICO conspiracy and sex trafficking. Now the defense is hoping to use that in their favor.
He started speaking less, eating less, withdrawing into himself. The confidence that once defined him now feels like a memory from another lifetime. When visitors come, few as they are, they describe a man lost in thought, his eyes distant, his voice trembling. They say he still insists he'll appeal, that he'll find a way out, but even he doesn't seem to believe it anymore. And it's not just the sentence that's breaking him, it's the realization that his name, once untouchable, has become a symbol of downfall. For years, Diddy was the blueprint. He was the man who turned every scandal into strategy, every loss into leverage. But now, there's no strategy left. The same headlines that once celebrated his genius now catalog his destruction. The same public that cheered his success now watches his collapse with morbid fascination. They say when a man like Diddy cries, it's not just sadness, it's rage, confusion, disbelief.
This despite Cassie herself testifying she couldn't recall how many beatings there were because there were so many. In this recent filing, though, the defense wrote, "The violence was not entirely one-sided. However, Ms. Ventura testified there were times when she initiated physical fights with Mr. Combs. On one occasion, for example, she punched Mr. Combs in the face. Mr. Combs, for his part, is the first to exclaim that these acts of domestic violence against Ms. Ventura are inexcusable. But the notion that the violence or coercion had a nexus to freak-offs is not true, as the jury clearly found." Now, part of the reason the judge kept him behind bars pending sentencing was because he admitted to being physically violent with Jane as recently as June of 2024, 3 months before his arrest. Jane testified she started that physical altercation and admitted to throwing things at him, calling him a pedophile and a monster after punching him in the head. The defense wrote, "By that point, Mr. Combs was intoxicated, as he had consumed multiple glasses of champagne and multiple shots of tequila. Again, Mr. Combs knows that partaking in any type of physical violence with a woman is inexcusable, but the jury rejected the argument that the violence caused Jane to participate in a hotel night." Throughout the court filing, the Mogul's defense team argues his conviction isn't like other Mann Act cases where the GOJ, for example, limits the prosecutions to cases involving sex trafficking minors or defendants who engage in commercial prostitution enterprises as panderers or call girl operations. They wrote, quote, "In other words, only 1% of Mann Act cases we identified involved so-called buyers or Johns. That number alone speaks volumes and corroborates the conclusion that the DOJ does not seek to incarcerate Mann Act defendants who merely purchase prostitution services." During the trial, we learned through testimony what some of the male escorts or entertainers that were hired do during these freak-offs or hotel nights, and that was through the testimony of Daniel Phillips and Sheree Hayes, aka The Punisher. Diddy's defense argued this is the only case they've identified where prosecutors claim professional consenting adult males were Mann Act victims, writing, "The government now claims that the male escorts were Mr. Combs' victims, but this is apparently the only case in Mann Act history where the government has argued that consenting professional adult male escorts or entertainers who made thousands of dollars were victims. The Mann Act did not originally treat men as victims, and Congress never anticipated such an application of the statute." They argue the time he served has been punishment enough, especially serving time at MDC Brooklyn. His team argued the mogul is routinely subjected to violence, both directed at him and at others. They point one example from less than 2 weeks ago, writing, "On September 12th, for example, defense counsel was in the middle of a legal video call with Mr. Combs, which was summarily ended at 2 p.m. because of a stabbing that locked the facility down for the next several days. They write living conditions at MDC remain inhumane, lockdowns remain common, and other conditions are similarly horrible. There are 10 different examples listed of what Diddy's life truly has been like behind bars, a far cry from his life of luxury, including constant suicide watch. This means that every 10 hours, Mr. Combs must present his identification card to the guards to show that he is alive and well. Limited access to clean water. Mr. Combs often heats his water to have clean water to drink without getting sick. Sleeping in a dorm-style room within 2 feet from other inmates with the bathroom in the same room with no door."
He's asking himself those questions every day, over and over again, trying to make sense of the fall. But the truth is simple, this time. The game caught up to him. The arrogance, the secrecy, the control, it all came crashing down. And now he's left alone with the truth. The prison guards say he keeps a photo on his small desk, an old one, from years ago, before the scandals, before the headlines. Sometimes he stares at it for hours, like he's trying to remember who that man was. Other times, he turns it face down, unable to look. The same man who once commanded millions now spends his days in silence, battling the one enemy he can't outmaneuver, his own guilt. Reports from inside say that Diddy's mental state is fragile. He's struggling to cope with the loss of control, the isolation, the relentless gossip that trickles in from the outside world. Every newspaper headline, every leaked photo, every whisper of betrayal feels like another knife in the back.
And even called the bail package a, quote, very, very rigorous set of conditions. This part is wild. He said it was even more strict than the MDC jail. But Judge Subramanian, he didn't bite on that, and Diddy's bail was denied for the 3rd time. According to a report from the Daily Mail, that's why Diddy had a breakdown. A person close to him apparently said, quote, "Spending the holidays behind bars was a nightmare for him." If we're to believe all this, Diddy had a meltdown in his cell and begged the guards to take him to the hospital for observation, but they refused. This same friend or person told the Daily Mail, quote, "He eventually managed to calm himself down with the meditation technique he's been using while he's been behind bars. It took him a few hours of deep breathing and focusing to get out of the bad space he was in, but he finally managed it." This isn't the first time Diddy's mental health has come into question while he's been at MDC. When he first arrived, he was on suicide watch, which the U.S. Department of Justice National Institute of Corrections describes as supervisory precautions taken for suicidal inmates that require frequent observation. Diddy's suicide watch was only temporary, though. He was housed in a special protective unit of the jail after that for the first few weeks of his stay. But Diddy right now is in Gen Pop, meaning general population, the place where majority of the inmates stay. And that's where he apparently had this meltdown over the holidays, at least according to one source. Another source, though, disagrees with all of this. They say Diddy is staying strong in jail despite missing his family a great deal at Christmas, which is a time he often spends with his children. But however Diddy spent the holidays, there are still a lot of questions in the case of Sean Combs. So we're turning now to former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani to talk all things Diddy. Nima, thank you so much for coming on with us today.
Of course, Sierra. Thanks for having me, as always.
Now, some of the reports are that P. Diddy had a breakdown or meltdown over the holidays when he is still at MDC behind bars. What do you make of those reports? Could he have had this meltdown?
I believe the reports, and obviously Diddy is someone who's rich and famous and has lived a life of luxury for many years, and now he's in federal prison during the holidays. So this isn't someone who's a hardened criminal who has spent a lot of time in custody. So the fact that he's spending Christmas and New Year's and future holidays in prison is probably finally getting to him. So I'm not surprised that he cracked.
You're right. It's definitely a change of tune from his lavish mansions and the holiday season to what he's experiencing right now. As far as the mental health side of things, I remember when Diddy was first arrested, he was put on suicide watch. So obviously keeping tabs on his mental health. Here in this instance, he apparently was asking for the guards to take him to the hospital so he could be treated there. Is this something that we're going to keep an eye on, Diddy's mental health behind bars?
Even his sons, once his pride and joy, are keeping their distance, trying to rebuild their own lives while the world judges them by his shadow. And maybe that's what hurts him most, the realization that his choices didn't just destroy his career, but they dragged down the people closest to him. The empire he built wasn't just his, it was theirs. And now, they're paying for it too. But the world outside isn't done talking about Diddy. Every day, new stories surface, new connections, new pieces of evidence. The investigations haven't stopped. In fact, they're multiplying. There are whispers of new cases, new testimonies, new witnesses stepping forward. And while Diddy sits in his cell, trying to find peace, the truth continues to unravel without him. He used to say he could control the narrative, that no matter what anyone said, he would always write the final chapter. But now, that power is gone. The story isn't his anymore. It belongs to the people he hurt, the ones who stayed silent for too long. It belongs
time that they weren't necessarily prostitutes, but did admit that they do specialized events and those that sort. But the defense said that these were consenting adults. It occurred in the privacy of hotel rooms or in someone else's home. It wasn't like that they were at a massage parlor or a room kind of in, what I'm talking about. And so the defense argued that this was pretty much a private matter. And so the government came back and said that this was laid out in several previous submissions that the defense put in and that they were all denied. But it was interesting just kind of hearing those arguments about O'Brien and learning more about O'Brien today.
Did you glean anything from the Judge Arun Subramanian, about which way he's going to rule on this? Because I understand he didn't make a decision, but he did, didn't at one point he's like, if you have a businessman who, pays for his client to be with a prostitute,
and the client participates in sexual acts with this prostitute, is the businessman liable, or is this businessman a prostitute? Or
is it transportation to engage in prostitution, or in a way?
Yeah, and
is it prostitution?
Yeah,
and I mean, he asked that because
he did.
And what was the response? But also, did it give you a sense that he's not believing the defense's arguments?
Well, I think there were little tidbits where I felt that way sometimes. And I feel like Judge Arun Subramanian, he does a very great job in really just kind of fleshing out what both sides want. He's always
making a video of the surveillance in order to show your wife. Jury might wonder what that's about. But look, I will say this, I said it before, I'll say it again. I thought that this was brilliant on the part of the prosecution. Before you bring Cassandra Ventura, you bring a witness to talk about the 2016 tape, corroborate her story about being attacked, allegedly sees her with these bruises. Again, I think that is an important witness. Just as important as Daniel Phillip, the next witness who took the stand. So there were two witnesses who testified before Cassandra Ventura. I think that's really great. And I've said it before, but remember when Cassandra Ventura filed her lawsuit in 2023, she laid out a lot of allegations. It was hard to know whether or not they're real or not. What do we take away from him? As soon as that tape came out, it changed the whole game. It not only corroborated that part of her lawsuit, but it arguably corroborated everything she was saying. So to begin with the videotape, to begin with the security guard, I think that's key. And then you go to Daniel Phillip. So this male performer talks about being paid to have sex with Cassie, that Combs was directing their sexual performances, testified about rubbing baby oil, role-playing, Combs pleasuring himself while this is going on, recording them, red couches, Astroglide, lubricant, that Combs was dressed up in a bandana covering his face. It was very detailed. He also testified that he observed Cassandra Ventura on drugs, believes that he heard Combs slapping her, saw her being dragged by Combs, her allegedly saying, "I'm sorry." Combs allegedly throwing a bottle of liquor at Cassandra Ventura. Combs taking a picture of his ID for insurance. Was that a form of intimidation or not? And on cross-examination by Sean Combs' defense counsel, he was pressed about inconsistent statements to authorities about whether or not he was a stripper or dancer when he was assigned to perform for Ventura and Combs, important for transportation to engage in prostitution. That he didn't even want money during these encounters. Quoted as saying, "In my head, I was just excited. I was in this world and happy to be involved with people of such notoriety." He expressed his feelings towards Ventura, Quote, if she ever gave me a chance to date her, I absolutely would have. And he testified that Cassandra Ventura paid him, right? So Dave, reliable witness, valuable witness, who did he benefit more, the prosecution or the defense?
I think it was a push.
And maybe that's why he's breaking down, because he finally realizes that no amount of power, no amount of fame, can rewrite what's already been written. The walls don't lie, the silence doesn't lie, and for the first time in his life, Diddy has no one left to perform for, no audience, no cameras, just himself, and the mirror that refuses to look away. At night, when the lights go out and the world goes quiet, they say you can hear him murmuring to himself, almost like he's trying to convince his own soul that this isn't the end. But deep down, he knows it is. Maybe not the end of his life, but the end of the man he once was, the end of the illusion, the end of control. Because no matter how many years pass, no matter what appeals are filed, no matter what headlines come next, this is who Diddy is now, a man who had it all, and lost everything. And somewhere in the silence of that prison cell, as the world outside keeps moving on, Diddy is finally realizing what he spent his whole life running from. The truth always catches up. It doesn't care about fame, it doesn't care about power, it doesn't care about legacy, it comes for everyone, eventually. And for Diddy, that moment has finally arrived.